Okay, so our group is Kyle Haynes, Ryan Sheets, Robert Lowell, and Julian Wallace, and this is what we call the gender and climate hypothesis. So our question is, what is the relationship between language and landscape, both human-built and wild?
So what is the gender climate hypothesis? Today we're going to prove to you three different things. The first is that by assigning gender to nouns, we believe that objects in the physical landscape become personified. Second, we believe that on that basis, speakers of gendered languages form richer connections to the landscape than people who speak non-gendered languages. Third, and most importantly, we believe that because speakers of gendered languages form more personal connections with the physical landscape around them, that they have less tendency to pollute and take more care of the environment around them. Does language affect the way we think? In a word, yes. Language has a profound effect on what we think and how we think it. This has always been a question of debate, but in the 21st century, we've really become more aware of how certain languages affect certain people's perceptions of the world around them. So in gendered languages, the way objects are personified often matches the gender of that noun. So for example, key is feminine in Spanish, but masculine in German. So speakers of Spanish are more likely to use feminine language to describe keys or personify them. So for example, they might use words like golden, intricate, little, lovely, shiny, or even tiny. But in German, those same speakers would say hard, heavy, jagged, metal, serrated, and useful. These words we would qualify as being more masculine. However, when you teach English speakers the differences between these words, they can also apply them to that same language. So what we mean is that even speakers of non-gendered languages can start to apply and learn gendered nouns. In that way, there's still hope that speakers of non-gendered languages can learn to personify the environment around them and take care of Mother Nature.
To test our hypothesis, we looked at the countries that pollute the most in both CO2 emissions and emissions per capita. The majority of these countries speak languages that are non-gendered. So when you look at the CO2 emissions, China's number one and the US is second. And both of those countries speak non-gendered languages, Mandarin and English. And you can see that their percentage of emissions is much higher than even the third place. In emissions per capita, Qatar, United States, and Australia are the top three. They speak Arabic and English, both languages that are also non-gendered.
So we're not saying that people who don't speak languages that have gendered nouns care about the environment. We're saying that language changes the way that people prioritize in a culture. And it doesn't change the way that they understand concepts, but it does shift their focus. Essentially, everyone is capable of empathizing with the environment, understanding the plight of the earth as it slowly starts to fall apart. But people who speak languages that have gendered nouns have almost an edge in this regard, because when nouns have genders, it almost implies a human characteristic, making it easier to sympathize and understand. So gendered language provides almost an implied connection between the human and the non-human. So that in turn makes it easier for people to understand as the earth and the environment around us becomes increasingly more challenged by human actions because we can see them in a more human light. And we can see this also in the way that we talk about the environment in English when we're talking about personification and the like. Women's a really good example of personification when it comes to talking about the environment. He's notable for using personification a lot and also having a deep affection for nature and for the world that he found himself in. So this is a short excerpt from a longer piece from his important work, which is Leaves of Grass, where he talks a lot about this love for the environment that he has. So the earth does not argue, it is not pathetic, has no arrangements, does not scream, haste, persuade, threaten, promise, makes no discriminations, has no conceivable failures, closes nothing, refuses nothing, shuts none out. Of all the powers, objects, states, it notifies, shuts none out. The earth does not exhibit itself, nor refuse to exhibit itself, possesses still underneath the ostensible sounds, the august chorus of heroes, the wail of slaves, percussions of lovers, curses, gasps of the dying, laughter of young people, accents of bargainers, underneath these possessing words that never fail, to her children the worlds of the eloquent dumb mother never fail. So this is just an example of the personification that's pretty prevalent in Whitman's work. He's talking about the earth, and he's prescribing very specific human characteristics, screaming. He's talking about persuading, threatening, promising, all which require the actual vocalization that the earth cannot do because it cannot vocalize, it can't speak. So that's a very human thing. So it's prescribing not only language to the earth, but also very specific human action, making it easy to empathize with and understand. He gives it this beautiful almost personality as he's writing about it in a way that really makes it easy to understand and want to protect the environment that he's talking about.
In contrast to poetry done by non-gendered language, as you saw in Walt Whitman, we also have poetry in gendered language. La Luna specifically, by Jaime Sabines, is a personification of the moon, an element of the environment, in a very personal and beautiful way. Attached is a video that you can watch that will be the actual author reading his poem, delivering his poetry, and you can see the connection he has with the moon. He describes the gaze of the moon, how it feels so personal yet so distant, the mesmerizing factors of the moon, the power of the moon, all of these things because it is La Luna. That extra word, la, the variation of the engendering of the moon, really changes his perspective on how you see it. In two ways, you can sort of see this in the English. The English translation is written here for us. It says, you can take the moon by the spoonful or in capsules every 2 hours. Think about this in a feminine way. You can take the moon by the spoonful or in capsules every 2 hours. That's what La Luna wants. But in Jaime's perspective, in a feminine moon, think about that personal relationship, that relationship with the woman. That's what Jaime is talking about. In English, we don't get that, but that's the entire point of the gender climate hypothesis, is that it's a very subtle change in perspective, a subtle change in how we see the environment, a subtle change in how Sabines sees the moon. And so English poetry, while it can give us that same perspective, that same connection to the environment, it's not the same subtleties, which is the whole point of our hypothesis. In On Trails by Robert Moore, we can see the gender climate hypothesis in some very specific ways. Moore travels through the forests of the East Coast, the Cherokee homeland, learning about the Cherokee people, the language, and how they treated the environment. You might think Cherokee isn't gendered. How does this support your hypothesis if the Cherokee had such a deep reverence for the environment? If the Cherokee protected their environment more than perhaps any other people and their language isn't gendered, how does that support and not refute your claims? The point is that language and environment have a very tight bond. And the Cherokee believed that the language and the environment were one. A quote from On Trail says, "This sense of deep geographic memory may seem mystical," he said, "but it isn't, or at least it isn't entirely, because the landscape is encoded directly into the language. Cherokee diction and syntax is mountainous." The language climate hypothesis says that, the gender climate hypothesis says that gender is a subtle change in how we see the environment. But the Cherokee language was constructed for the environment in a way that isn't subtle at all. That's why they cared for the environment more than anybody else, because it wasn't a subtle connection to the environment, it was an obvious connection to the environment, which is the whole point of the gender climate hypothesis.
So today, I think we've shown you a lot of things. First of all, we've proven that language does indeed have a profound effect on the way people think. We discussed how gendered nouns, like he, can affect how people view the environment around them, and that they are viewing and perceiving these objects in the way they would personify them, based on male, female, etc.
We also talked about how there is a correlation between the countries that pollute the most and the languages they speak, and whether or not they're gendered.
We're not saying that English makes it impossible for people to care about the environment. In fact, we've seen proof of people who care very deeply about the environment and do speak English, like Walt Whitman. We're just saying that people who speak gendered languages empathize a little bit easier.
Finally, we compared and contrasted some poetry from non-gendered and gendered language, and what we found was that the gender climate hypothesis talks about subtleties in language that change how we see objects in the environment. In On Trails, Robert Moore talks about how the Cherokee had such a deep connection to the environment, even though their language wasn't gendered, but it's because their language and the environment were built together to mean something together. And it's that connection that we're trying to point out in the gender climate hypothesis between gendered languages and the environment, and something that we think needs to carry over to non-gendered languages and the environment so that we can begin to fix the problem of environmental destruction.